right, in discussing this due diligence provision of the contract, we understand that this is just one paragraph of the contract and that there are other paragraphs. One other paragraph that it interplays, there's an interplay with the due diligence termination, is the financing contingency. Financing contingency in the contract is in paragraph 7. It is separate just by the number, easy to remember. 7 is not 8. So there are different rules under 7 than 8. And should someone terminate under 7, or the contingency, it would be terminating, let me use my words correctly. Should the contingency in paragraph 7 not be fulfilled, then the buyer would not be bound to go forward with the contract. So he would not have to pay the termination fee. Now, that assumes, of course, that the financing falls apart during the due diligence period. If it does not fall apart during the due diligence period and the termination fee is paid, then contract is over, everything is done. The financing, there would be no further progress in the financing because there is no contract, there is no property for that buyer to buy. However, the buyer possibly would know that maybe there are some issues that are coming up in the financing, and they're pretty sure they want the property. And so they don't terminate under paragraph 8. The due diligence period comes and goes. And so they are buying however they're buying, as is in this case, or maybe they've renegotiated something, but they, for whatever reason, they have not terminated under paragraph 8. And then lo and behold, their financing does not come through. So then the buyer would, the contract would become null and void for lack of a contingency being fulfilled, and the seller would not receive a termination fee, and the buyer would not be obligated to pay a termination fee because they're not terminating under paragraph 7. Now, the financing raises issues. What if the lender requires repairs to be made? Well, the lender requiring repairs to be made is a different story than the buyer asking the seller to make these repairs. If that happens, then oddly enough, the contract doesn't specifically state that the buyer has to make the repairs, the seller has to make the repairs. It just said the repairs must be made. The lender is going to require those repairs to be made before the financing. If they're not made, then the contract falls under the financing condition. Our contingency, the buyer does not pay a termination fee, and the contract becomes null and void. Now, remember, either the buyer or the seller can terminate under a financing contingency. So there are incentives there for both. And now if I were the seller, I would require not that application for financing be made after the contract was formed. I would require a pre-approval letter. And to me, that pre-approval letter is that the lender has everything he or she needs from the buyer to do the loan except for the property address. Okay, they've already given tax returns, they've given their monthly bank statements. So there's not something that the lender is saying, if I get this one more piece of information from the buyer, I could submit this to underwriting. That the only thing the lender's waiting on to submit to underwriting is the property address. If I were the seller, I would require that kind of confirmation. If I am in a multiple offer situation and I have that from one and I don't have it from the other, then the offers are similar in other respects, and that makes it easy for me to determine which one I would choose. I would choose the one that all of the information is in to the lender. Now, the other incentive for the buyer, if the buyer does not want to terminate and pay a termination fee, but they want repairs made, and they can't seem to get together on the repairs being made, don't be fooled that if there are repairs made and the lender requires them to be remade, they must be made for the loan to be processed and for the loan to be made to the buyer. So the buyer certainly could then, if there are real issues with the property and the lender knows or finds out about those issues to the property, then the lender would possibly be the one killing the deal under the failure to make repairs. And so the termination fee wouldn't have to be made. So the buyers would have then some adverse incentives to make sure the lender knew that the property was in disrepair in some way. So there are interplays between repairs and the termination fee and whether it would ever be paid or not.